All right, welcome to the very first episode of the Navel Gaze. I am Aaron Terrell. She is Tali, and we are co-hosting this podcast about the experience, an experience that we both share in opposite directions. That is autosexuality. So this should be pretty interesting and, needless to say, controversial podcast. So thanks for tuning in and being brave with us. I guess we should start with you. Only recently came to realize that what you had always experienced of sexuality was autosexuality. So if you want to kind of take us through, what the experience of the sexuality was, and then like what triggered that revelation, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I think something that's been really clarifying in the conversations that you and I have had that led to the idea to have this conversation in public is that, people don't really talk about what's going on in their mind when they're sexually aroused. They don't even necessarily think about it themselves that much. And I think, especially when you don't know what other people are thinking, there's a tendency to believe that what I'm experiencing is how everybody experiences sexual attraction or something like that. I realized very recently that I think that a big part of my sexuality is autosexuality. Insofar as what I think I find most sexually arousing about sexual interactions with other people is my body and the way that sort of I look in the act or in the interaction. I think the word autosexual is a scary label, and it sounds like, and even when you kind of give it a Google search, it comes up as sort of a preference for sex with yourself over partnered sex. And I don't relate to that experience at all. It's not that it's only about me and that I'm not attracted to other people. But I think when I was really sort of drilling down to the origins, my earliest memories of my same-sex attraction, it's really intermingled with, I was going to say fascination, but that's not really strong enough a word. Arousal at myself sexually. I remember a story that I've told a few times is when I think back to the origins of my same-sex attraction. A salient memory for me is looking up online, does X, Y, or Z make me gay? And getting a response that made sense to me at the time that I think even might have used the word autosexual, but it didn't explain it as a sexuality in and of itself. It was just sort of like this facet of human sexuality where people are attracted to themselves. People think that they look good. And so, of course, you're going to find other people who look like you attractive. And so that article told me, no, you're not gay. And that was the answer I was looking for. And so that was enough for me. And again, I was Googling these things because I was also really fascinated and aroused by women's bodies, other women's bodies, not just my own, which is, again, what made this word autosexual not really click for me. But I'm taking a page out of Aaron's book here and just being brave and laying my very personal and sort of just naturally embarrassing, because this topic makes people, a little uncomfortable. I'm just laying it on the line in hopes that other people might have similar experiences. Should I keep going? Should I get into more detail here?
Or should we? I was just gonna. Yeah, we should add some clear. What you just said there is, we were having this conversation privately because, again, so few people talk about like what's going on in their minds sexually, like what it is that's arousing about it, and we realized that we don't know how many people experience this kind of autosexuality because nobody is talking about it, and so. The only other woman I'd heard from who had a similar experience from you, she's completely anonymous, but she reached out on Twitter, and she said that her experience of sexuality was arousal by her own body, and she was watching the Oprah show sometime in the 90s, and another woman called in and reported that same experience. And she remembers feeling like such relief, like, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not insane. This is normal, or something along those lines. And at this, or maybe I can't remember the details of it, or if it was just like, oh, that's what it's called. I can't remember what she expressed, other than immediately after this woman's explaining her sexuality, the response from Oprah and the rest of the participants in that episode was like, oh wow, that's so weird, and nobody could relate to it, or at least they didn't say so. And so she went back to feeling ashamed about how her sexuality works.
Yeah.
And so I think we don't know how many. Oh, and that's another thing, is like you looked up that uh, when you were doing the YouTubing about autosexuality, you saw that episode of The View where
Yeah.
they read the definition of autosexuality and they start basically just mocking it. And again, it's like just assumed, oh, you're talking about masturbation. It's like, no, it's like it's how the sexual orientation works, not about the kinds of acts. But yeah, the response is to just make fun of it or diminish it, or and obviously people who are hearing about this, they feel like, oh well, you know, they may have never even heard that described until now when it's being disparaged. And if it is their experience of sexuality, they're not immediately going to be like, oh well, that's what I experienced. They're going to be like, oh shit, apparently I'm really weird. And so anyway, so we thought it'd be very important, very hopefully useful to people to kind of talk about the experience of autosexuality without any of that disparagement, any of that, oh, it's just being narcissistic, or a fetishist or whatever. Because that's the thing is, I'm going on a different tirade, but I'll let you go back into
You're
what
right.
you
I
were
wanted to say that
explaining.
too, because yeah, I mean, when something starts to resonate with you or sounds like it might fit or just kind of itches your brain a little bit, you start to go out and look for more information. And so I was looking to listen to accounts of people who are calling themselves autosexual. And Aaron and I kind of spoke about the fact that a lot of the people on the internet are some of the most extreme, the quirkiest, to be gentle about it. And so it seemed like there were only sort of extremes of it out there. And when I was watching the View episode, which not only did they define autosexuality, but they had prepared in their notes the definition of narcissism, because that is a pretty much an automatic reaction from people, which is like, wow, that's so full of yourself. No one, that is not socially acceptable in our society, for good reason, right? We need to care, like we humans rely on each other. And so too much of a self-focus can be maladaptive. And so I kind of understand that response. But there was a comment on that video by a woman who said, like, I'm autosexual, but I need, my partner involved as part of worshiping my body. And that was the first thing that I was like, oh, that tracks. That totally tracks. In fact, that's a word I've used with partners before. And that I get really excited if a partner uses about my body spontaneously in some way. That right there, that really fits my sexual motivation, is just being like so desired in my body. Yeah, and like, I guess just the little things that I started to put together about some of my behaviors and about some of my arousal patterns that have led me to this conclusion that part of my sexual motivation is autosexuality. Is like, lots of people sext and send photos back and forth. And I'm married now, so it's not something that I'm doing so much. But in previous relationships, I loved to send, nude photos of myself. I didn't really care or particularly want photos in response. It was way more exciting and arousing for me to take the photos of myself and then kind of look through them and pick the nice one, and to get the response from the other person who's so into, my body in those pictures. And again, to me, I'm like, oh, that's just normal.
Because it's all you've experienced.
Because it's all I've experienced. And I think also to a certain extent too, because there's a lot of, as we're in like sort of a sexting culture, this wasn't necessarily a thing so much 20 years ago, right before before smartphones, really. Although I was doing some naked photo exchanging with the digital camera before the smartphone era in my early days. But there's this like, there's this meme in the culture of like, no one wants a dick pic, right? So there's this idea that like, oh yeah, like couples are sending pictures back and forth and the women will send the topless photos, but they don't actually want to see the dick pic. Sorry to be so graphic, but for me, it's like I was with women whose bodies I am very attracted to, and I would get aroused. I do get aroused from other women's bodies. This is another thing that you and I spoke about, Aaron. I can experience like intense, sudden arousal if, there's like, I was just watching Katy Perry's, new music video on Twitter the other day, and in it, they like zoom in on her chest and her boobs are shaking back and forth, and I can experience intense physical arousal from other people's bodies. But what feels like the sort of origin of that was this arousal at my own body from a pretty young age, from my sexual awakening, really, as I've come to see it.
And that's why I explained to you a few times, it's like this, what you experience of sexuality, I believe, is truly, and I think other people will interpret as an enviable experience. That is not to be all check your privilege. I hope that didn't come across like that. But,
No, not at all.
But and I think that's what it's so important that you and I co-host this podcast together, because I have the opposite experience of autosexuality. So I still have that. Basically, so the premise of this podcast is that when you have an experience of autosexuality that aligns with the target of your attraction, so in your case, the female body, that creates, you can take pleasure in your own body, right? You can sexually appreciate your own body. Whereas if you have an experience of autosexuality that does not align with your body, such as the experience I had, where I was attracted to men, but with an intense feeling that I should have that body. That's the type of body that I should have, because that's what I'm attracted to. So it's an autosexuality searching externally for a target, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so that's why, the contrasting of these two things is really important, because I think well, I guess maybe we should back up, because this is just a theory that we are positing. This isn't necessarily something that the scientists or anyone else agrees with. But we kind of have come to this kind of shared conclusion that most of what we call gender dysphoria, which is my history and experience, is autosexuality that is misaligned with the target of your sexuality. So for those who aren't familiar with the podcast I previously co-hosted, it's called Transparency. It's important to note that I am a female to male transsexual. So I am a female person who desired to be male, because that's what I was attracted to. So that's what I thought my body should be.
Surprise! Anybody who didn't know.
What's that?
Surprise! Anybody who didn't know you were a female. Yeah.
Right. Just drop that bombshell that we're only about 25% through. But So I always had this intense feeling that my body was wrong, that it should be male. I didn't know what autosexuality was, and it didn't even feel that sexual, because I guess we'll probably get into the nitty gritty of all this in later episodes. But for me, yeah, that feeling was always that I should have a male body, but males were also who I was sexually attracted to. Until I transitioned and that went in the other direction. Again, things that we'll get into the nitty gritty of later on in future installments here. But yeah, so me feeling like my body should reflect what I am attracted to, I believe is the same experience that you had. It's just, yeah, the mismatching of that autosexuality with the target of one's sexuality. So I will be. It is interesting to something that we've been wondering about is like gender dysphoria. We now know is a pretty common experience, and again, my speculation, and I think you're in agreement, is that when that gender dysphoria seems to be the likely cause by this mismatched autosexuality. But so that seems to be pretty common. I wonder then how common is your experience? But again, like in your experience, you know, when there isn't a problem, so with gender dysphoria, that's a problem. People seek solutions for problems, but your version of
Yeah.
autosexuality wasn't a problem. There's nothing to seek a solution for, or even really, other than you're wondering if it made you gay, like look up like what is going on here. So yeah, we are hoping that by telling your experience, like we can, you know, maybe that'll resonate with other people who didn't realize that they had this perhaps unusual, perhaps very common, we don't know, experience of sexuality. And is it just when it mismatches that we go, oh, that's gender distress, and seek a solution to it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm glad that you emphasize that this is these are our theories. This is what is sort of making sense when we get as honest with ourselves as possible about our own experiences, about our relationships, things like that. These are the things that seems to be the most coherent, the most explanatory for the most people, for the most experiences. But we've already found hiccups, you know, little sticking points along the way that need further exploration, not just between Aaron and I, but, you know, it'd be great if there were sexologists who were looking into some of this stuff. You know, there's the hiccup of female versus male sexuality and how that might manifest, how autosexuality might manifest differently in males and females. I think that was a big thing for you, Aaron, and similar to how I didn't identify with what autosexuality was being sold to me as. The most common type of autosexuality in the sexology research and in the conversation right now is allogynephilia in males. And the way that it is labeled as a paraphilia and just some of these sort of explicit sexual aspects of it for some people was something that you didn't relate to. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I've now come to believe that I do have the female equivalent of AGP, but because it manifested as severe distress at what my body was, and not like a sexual desire for a male body, it didn't match up. That didn't align with what I understood of autogynephilia, which is presented in more that paraphilic, fetishistic, whatever, arousal at the idea of having female body parts, about female clothing, etc. I couldn't relate with that. But yes, then if we match on, if we realize that female sexuality is very distinct from male sexuality, it's going to be much more subdued, much more sentimental, I suspect, and much more, just not sexually compulsive, and it's not going to be identified by others as like creepy, or like any sort of like that kind of negative language that people associate with it. It doesn't. Females expressing masculinity or presenting themselves in a masculine way doesn't usually, engender the kind of negative responses as the opposite does as well. But yeah, then I guess we could probably start to dive into like why we named the podcast what we did, and why we think so often Oh, also, by the way, shout out to, is it, damn it, I'm blanking on his name. Scott Eastman? Is that it? Damn it. Anyway,
No.
Devin Eastman. That's who it was. Thank you, Devin Eastman, for this great suggestion for a title of The Navel Gaze. But yeah, because we, again, our hypothesis here is that so often autosexuality manifests as homosexuality because in the event like your style of it, you are attracted to your female body parts, and therefore you are also attracted to those on others as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it seems to me that the excuse me, when this conflicts in the other direction, like what I have, people will adopt or manifest or whatever. I'm not sure if I'm using the right word here, but it can often become a homosexual attraction in the service
Develop
of
into.
yeah, develop into a homosexual attraction that originates as a desire to embody yourself as the opposite sex. And so then the extension of that is attraction to the same sex as yeah, a further embodiment, a further manifestation of the self as the opposite sex. And so we see this a lot in allogynephilic males who date men because sometimes exclusively because this enables them to kind of full time feel like they're in that kind of female role and can yeah, it's just a way of manifesting and kind of validating the femininity in the self. And this seems pretty common in women who have my experience, um, who part of embodying masculinity is dating other women, and it seems that female sexuality. Go on, you probably might have something. Yeah,
Yeah, no. Part of the problem, I think, that women have seeing themselves in the analog to AGP, to seeing themselves, um, is the fact that their attraction to both physical and romantic attraction to women is sincere. And
right,
so to them, it seems like they're saying I'm some repressive straight person. When really, from
right,
a super young age, I knew that I was attracted to women. Um, and so I think, especially because we know so little about the sort of female analog of this, and there is so much stigma around AGP. Um, I think it can come as like a real identity threat. Like, I don't even mean a threat, yes, but like an identity sort of crisis. Because when we use words like meta attraction or pseudo bisexuality, we're saying it's not real. And I think there's two things going on. One is one that you kind of talked about, Aaron. Maybe you can elaborate, but it's sort of like sexual behavior can influence your sexuality. And so someone who's engaging in same-sex behaviors and that is feeling good and that's what their brain associates with sex and pleasure can very sincerely enjoy that type of relationship. And I think that is probably especially so for females. Um,
yeah, exactly.
it seems like there is a lot of pushback in the lesbian community about female homosexuality. And there's this idea that there seems to be an acceptance of the fact that male sexuality and female sexuality are different. They function differently, they manifest differently. People seem to be able to acknowledge that. But then they will also say that, like, a lesbian is someone who is exclusively same-sex attracted. And by that, they mean has never been with a man, never had, or if they did, it was because of societal pressures or God forbid, abuse or assault or something like that. And that in fact, they feel like disgust at the idea of ever being with a man. And so I think part of what drew me into sympathy with some of the stuff that you were saying on Twitter about this stuff, Aaron, is just the fact that I knew that not to be true. Like, I know I've been told by some of these women that I'm not really a lesbian. And another thing that I think we want to get at by calling this the navel gaze, right? And, you know, calling ourselves gays here is that, well, a few things. Gay and lesbian are social identity labels. Theoretically, they are used to, we like to believe that in females, just like males, it's describing someone's unconscious sexual response or something to visual or physical stimuli. But I think we know that that's a lot more complicated in women anyway. There are women like me who feel sincere and, again, like physical target-oriented gynephilia, attraction to other women, who have a history with men that they do not regret or feel disgust by. I think, you know, I call myself a lesbian, even though lots of people would want to call me bisexual. And by the way, that's fine. People can call me whatever they want. But you know, it's sort of just functionally true. I'm married to a woman. The way that I exist in the world is as a lesbian. And so if someone feels the need to tell me that I'm not, like, that's fine, but I'm still going to call myself that. And that just is how I sort of experience the world. And I think it for many women, it is more complicated. We see women go in both directions, frankly. We see women who have relationships, long-term relationships with men and have children, and then later in life meet a woman, or, you know, or decide that they really need to explore that attraction that maybe they've always felt. And you see women in the lesbian community who end up marrying men. Could that man or woman be the exception to their sexual orientation? Perhaps, but does that make it insincere or fake or pseudo in some way? No. And so I think we do want to, it's important for us, I think for both of us, it feels very clear for both of us that our gynephilic attraction is sincere, regardless of what motivated it or sparked it, in a sense. Yeah, I think that my attraction to other women is really tied up to this arousal that I have about my own body and my own sort of sexiness as a woman. But it's sincere. And like I said before, it's outside of myself. I get physically aroused at the sight of other women's bodies. You know, not all the time. I'm able to live, you know, a pretty normal life here. But yeah, it's sincere. I'm not lying, you know, I'm not lying about it. And I think that's why this feels so threatening to so many people, is because it feels like you're saying you're a liar. If you are, you know, Aaron, if you are autoandrophilic, well, hello, philic is right there in the title. You obviously like men. You are lying in some way, you know, or your attraction to females is in some way insincere. And I think it's really important to both of us to challenge that.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the things that took me so long to realize that autoandrophilia described my experience was because I didn't relate with that concept of meta attraction, because my attraction to women felt completely organic and sincere and not at all like an effort to feel masculine or something, like, which is how meta attraction is explained. But again, yeah, I think in males, but especially in females, that extension of one's autosexuality can result in a genuine, genuine same-sex attraction. So yeah, maybe for people who listeners for whom the concept of meta attraction or pseudo bisexuality might be a little hazy. All right, yeah. So when the sexologists were originally writing about the experience of meta attraction, it's kind of understood as it's presented almost like you're using other people as props in your own sexual fantasy of yourself, and that's not at all how we experience, you know, relating with other people sexually. Very much they are whole people. We're sharing, you know, like a mutually enjoyable experience with, and I know, you know, obviously my partner is a whole entire person that I love completely. Like the way that, yeah, the way that they write about the meta attraction, it just, or pseudo bisexuality, whichever one you want to call it, it just, yeah, it's not. I don't think it's relatable to a lot of people who experience autosexuality, but also genuine attractions to
Yes.
people of their same sex. Um, but yeah, we should lay out the we're just referring to autosexuality kind of holistically, but it's seen more clearly, or people probably think of it more clearly as four different types when it comes to sexual orientation and the actual sex of the individual experiencing it. So I describe myself as autoandrophilic, because I'm a female who was attracted to males prior to transitioning, and it's getting more confusing and complicated, but again, for a later date. So that was auto heterosexuality. So a female who's attracted to males and to being one, auto heterosexuality. In females would be autoandrophilia. In males, this is autogynephilia. That is a heterosexual male who is attracted um, uh, to females and desires to be one himself. That is a auto heterosexual male, an autogynephile. Um, and then the homosexual ones. You want to take that away?
Sure. I mean, and again, this is all something, this is less studied by the sexologists, and this is pretty new for me. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
I should put that clarification around the
yeah,
autoandrophilia thing as well, because
yeah,
this is something that yeah, we are kind of philosophizing about. It's something
yeah.
that it's an experience that I relate to, and it's an experience that a lot of other dysphoric females relate to. That
Hmm.
sounds like it describes their experience very um, to a T. But the sexologists at this point have not do not agree that it is a thing. I think they're wrong, but just putting that
Yeah.
out there that yeah, that it's not like a scientifically founded theory at this point.
Yeah, so there's the auto heterosexuality, which is what we think of as trans, basically, which is what is likely, it seems like the data at least supports this is what's motivating at least the majority of the males. And Aaron and I would suspect that this is also um, motivating a major, or is the cause of the sex dysphoria and the gender dysphoria and distress that motivates people to transition. We feel like that
Mhm.
it might account for a lot of the females as well. The less known, because it doesn't result in sort of an identity crisis, would be the auto homosexuality. So that would be autoandrophilia in males, which some people might be more familiar with or might have heard this experience explicated before, which is males who are what came first, the chicken or the egg? Aaron and I will talk about this on a later episode too. But males who are either really attracted to themselves, and so that generalizes out to their sexuality as gay. They find other men's bodies really attractive, or it's that they have this sexuality of homosexual. They're attracted to men's bodies, and so because they have that body, they are able to have this intense arousal and attraction to themselves. So that's would be autoandrophilia in males. And then in females, it would be autogynephilia. And so this was a light bulb that I had just about yesterday, is that would make me an autogynephile. And so maybe this podcast will do some good in destigmatizing autogynephilia, because actually this idea of love of oneself as a woman really does resonate to me. When I was talking to Aaron about coming to terms with my experiences as influenced by autosexuality, I said that something that I've always said about myself, my favorite thing about myself and my body, is that it's so womanly. I love the fact that I have curves, that when I gain weight or lose weight, I have a womanly body. You know, I've got, I'm not going to try, I don't want to talk about myself too much, right? But like, yeah, the shapes and curvature of my body is like really satisfying to me. And it's sexy to me. It's really sexy to me. And that's where I think some people too will use this like, oh yeah, well, everyone feels sexy about those types of things. And that's what we're kind of trying to figure out too. This, we are hoping that people are going to come forward, and either every female on the planet is going to, or every female homosexual on the planet is going to say, oh yeah, totally, I get that. Or people are going to say, yeah, no, that's not, I deal with my own insecurities, or really I need to be so turned on by my partner in some way, you know, to get in the mood. And so we don't know, because people don't talk about this. So we really do want to drill down on what actually is sort of the typical experience. But based on what Aaron and I have, what fits our experiences and what feels explanatory, that I would be autogynephilic. So I am attracted to myself as a woman, my womanly body, and attracted to other women and other women's bodies. And for me, like Aaron, it's also a little more complicated because of my sexual history with men, that while my sexual and romantic desires for women feel much stronger than they did for men, I don't feel any disgust about my experiences with men. I don't feel regret. I often said when I was first coming out, I never felt like I was lying to myself. I didn't feel like I was living in a closet. More so, I felt like I unlocked something when I allowed myself to experiment with women. Yeah.
When you were saying that when you first were understanding the whole autosexuality thing, or realizing that it applied to you, you were describing to me how you would like. Could you talk about the actual sex, if you don't mind going this TMI, but the actual sex with men and what's going on in your brain when you're having sex with a man? Just because I think that's really illuminating. It was for me anyway.
Like the straddling thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. This is, I alluded to it earlier in this conversation, but I'll be more explicit because I do think it puts a fine point on like, oh yeah, this is probably not so typical. This is what really felt for me.
We'll find out.
Right. Maybe this is female sexuality. But I realized that, especially in sexual interactions with men, but really sexual interactions, like, thinking about things that would arouse me, or the sexy parts of the interaction, straddling my partner, the sexual partner, came to mind. And when I was thinking about what makes that so exciting, and like why I really want to do that, when engaging with a partner, is not because my legs are around them and there would be easier access for sex. It's not because we're face to face and so we're more intimate. It's because I'm visualizing in my mind the way that my body looks. Like, I find it very sexy, like my legs spread over somebody else. The thought of that, to the point where like I visualize it in my mind what it would look like behind me. So if I'm straddling someone, they're looking at me, even the partner, even the target of the partner in sex, because I guess the target here is myself, right? So even my partner in sex wouldn't be able to see what I look like from behind. So it's not that I'm imagining how sexy even necessarily that they think I look. I'm thinking of how sexy it is, how I look in this sexual act. That is when I dig into it, that's the motivation for me to engage in foreplay of that nature, is like, this is pretty hot, when I do this. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate you going into the detail there, because I think, I think a lot of people will appreciate hearing that if they, if it's something they can relate to. Well, again, I'm so curious to see what is the who can resonate with that? Is it rare, or is it much more common than we believe, or that we think at this point? But also, it's just so incredible to me because it is so very different than my experience of
Mm-hmm.
sex, which especially like pre-transition anyway, because I don't have this problem at all anymore. But pre-transition, it was almost like a need to disassociate. I was so like, I wanted to having sex with my partner, but I was repulsed by my own body, and so it was like I had to somehow engage in a way that I like kind of diminished my awareness of my own sexed body. So it was, yeah, completely opposite of your experience.
Mm-hmm.
There, I don't have that problem post transition, and this is another reason why, again, the delay in me grasping the androphilia, because I'm not like sexually turned on by the idea of being male, but it is necessary in order for me to be present during sex, to not feel the need to disassociate. Um, so yeah, it's like it solves the problem that was my autogynephobia by being male, and then I can fully be present and not afraid of my body, or not
Mm-hmm.
repulsed by my body. Because yeah, so while yours was a turn on to you, mine was a turn off to me, and I have I don't recommend it, kids, but I did solve it with transition. So it took that away. Um, but yeah, I want to be very careful with how I talk about this, because I do think like it did solve a problem that I had, but we also do want to be. I want to be very clear about this is not the ideal solve. Like if you can make peace with the body that you have, that's
Yeah.
that's the ideal scenario. But I also want to be fully transparent in the fact that it did solve that problem that I had, which was kind of, yeah, a repulsion to my own body. But I guess that's a kind of a good segue as well into something that people misunderstand a lot, that the experience of self-love, like in the View article where, or excuse me, in that View video where they were basically calling self-attraction narcissism, and you're obviously not a
Mm-hmm.
narcissist, and
Right.
but and I am not. Again, they can easily, excuse me, gender dysphoria can be easily misunderstood to be a kind of self-loathing. I did not have self-loathing. I was always a big fan of my brain, like who I was as a person. I was very happy with, but it was my body that was the problem. My body felt wrong, um, but I've always lived in my head, been a big kind of
Mm-hmm.
like really really intense internal world, let's say, and
I relate to that
uh,
very much.
right,
Yeah.
yep, not being so physically present, as being much more kind of, yeah, in our heads a lot. And I was really, yeah, again, like the way my brain worked. I just loved my internal world, and I was kind of afraid that testosterone, or no, excuse me, I was not that I was afraid. I was very excited about the physical changes that testosterone was going to bring me. But I realize now, if I had known then how much testosterone would have changed my psychology, I may not have done it, just because that's how much I didn't hate myself. Like I was a big fan of myself. I wasn't. It was just my body. Again, I keep saying this, but my body is what felt wrong, out of alignment with my head, with my brain, with what my brain expected. Um, but yeah, so I definitely wasn't self-loathing. I can't relate to that. The people who say that they transitioned because they hated themselves and they wanted to get away from themselves. That was not me at all. It's like I wanted to fully be in my body, and not be repulsed by it. And
I
testosterone did that.
I think that contrasts a little bit too with the sort of Rajdi phenomenon, which we see is for some of them. I think you and I both agree that a lot of the rapid onset gender dysphoria um, is a product of, I'm going to say a product of woke, and that sounds so reductionist. But it's basically that it's social contagion, that it's just so culturally and socially influenced. Um, and it provides a path for young people who are in any type of distress. It gives them, right, it's a new symptom pool that they can pick
Mhm.
from to attach meaning to their sincere experiences, let's say, of distress. And we know that the younger generations are experiencing a really significant and debilitating amount of distress. But you hear the narrative often. I feel like Abigail Schreier really talked about this, put this well in Irreversible Damage, where for some of them it does seem like they are trying to, they can start over as someone new. They can be a new person. They don't have to be who they are, whether that's because of their distress or whether that's because who they are is a cis straight white so and so that isn't kind of allowed to have a say or be viewed with any sympathy or humanity. And so I do think there's a lot more of that going on. That feels really categorically different from this sex dysphoria in your body. And also this self-concept as the opposite sex. This self-concept as the opposite sex only really seems to make sense to me as an inversion in some way. I don't entirely understand how or why a homosexual would have that type of inversion unless they are autosexual. It seems like that explains this this severe gender and sex dysphoria, basically, is that they don't want to just, you didn't want to just be something different. You didn't really want to be someone different. You just literally conceptualized your body like there's just something like wrong with your body, which again, I personally don't see how that is explained by being a homosexual, for example.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's something that has never made sense to me, is this assumption that it would be natural for a homosexual to desire the body parts of the opposite sex.
Yeah.
Where would that come from? It seems like to desire, to embody, to have opposite sex features. It seems to only make sense in the context of autosexuality, of not being able to differentiate what you externally value and what yourself should embody.
I think it's also possible too that like for some people, like we were saying, their same-sex attraction can be really very sincere, and I think that actually might be dependent on just how severe their dysphoria is too. And so even if what we're saying is that the root of this, at the base of this, when you're really a small person, pre-sexual person, basically, is this, attraction to the opposite sex. If your dysphoria is so bad, being with the opposite sex is going to highlight how feminine or masculine you are. And so, yeah, I think the reason it doesn't make sense is even more profound if we were to look at males, because we know that male sexuality is sort of just much more intense and
target specific.
A little more black and white than female sexuality. And so I think it's a common, if gay men are being honest, which I have no reason to believe they're not, it's a common refrain that gay men are essentially repulsed by women's naked bodies. Like a vagina really disgusts them. They have no sexual arousal response. If that is the case, which I have no reason to believe it's not, why would someone who is repulsed by vaginas want to have a vagina? Someone who is repulsed by women's bodies want to have that. And I think it can be scary if you have based your identity around being gay to somehow acknowledge that there's something sexy I find something sexy about the opposite sex, sexy enough to want it on myself, sexy enough to want to manifest it. And I think that feels like a real challenge to the way that someone may have conceptualized themselves for their entire life, especially if their dysphoria was so severe that from a very young age it was clear that they were not even attracted to the opposite sex because that was so dysphoria inducing. this idea of being with a man, let's say, as a woman who wants to be a man, would just, the contrast would be too much to push through, basically.
Yeah, you that was kind of like a revelation to me that hadn't occurred. That some say some lesbians, for example, would dysphoric lesbians, let's say,
Yeah.
would be such because the being with a man, is going to kind of highlight what is female about them. But it's interesting is that my and hence why they are exclusively attracted to females. But I had the exact opposite experience personally,
Right.
in that, like, I wished I was a lesbian because then I could manifest my masculinity. I could take on like an external masculine persona by dating women. But I was so repulsed by my own body, I couldn't fathom sexually engaging with somebody
Right.
with that body. Like it felt like, said before, it felt like disgust squared. Essentially, like it just made the dysphoria that much worse. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I could see somebody whose dysphoria may be more social and interpersonal and less
Yeah.
anatomical, because mine was quite anatomical and not very social and interpersonal. So if you had more of a social interpersonal desire to occupy the role of a man, and less anatomical dysphoria, then the lesbian identity is going to have much appeal.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't overcome the anatomical stuff. Why the introduction of testosterone resulted in intense gynephilic attraction in me is a story for another episode. Or
It's because
I'm
you're
still trying to
really a
work it out
man,
myself.
Aaron. You
Yeah,
were
nope.
actually a man trapped in a woman's body.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Unlocked that truth with pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Uh,
But yeah, no, something you said that I think is really important, right, is like dysphoric female. Basically, you and I both believe that calling someone an autoandrophilic lesbian is a completely coherent statement. It's not
yeah,
contradictory. That you can
no,
have autosexuality that is related to a heterosexual impulse and still be sincerely, authentically, and persistently attracted sexually and romantically to the same sex. It's not contradictory in the way that it sounds because of these labels and because of, I think, the stigma that the male versions of autosexuality come with.
yeah, yeah. And this is kind of further demonstrated. I've spoken to before. I kind of had this theory that autoandrophilia can cause can result in lesbianism. I was speaking to multiple lesbians who, when I was explaining that I thought I was autoandrophilic, and they were explaining that they were as well. They were aroused by the idea of having a penis, and sometimes aroused by like wearing men's clothes, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And but they were entirely externally still attracted to women, and so they kind of understood their experience to be typical of female homosexuality. When I think,
Right.
and you and I think, what's actually going on there is that no, the autoandrophilia came first, and the external gynephilic attraction is an extension thereof. But again, like you said, that does not make it any less real or
Exactly. Right. And
genuine. Yeah.
the reason that autoandrophilic lesbians are seeing their experience as a lesbian experience is because because it seems like, if Aaron and I are correct, it seems like autoandrophilia often results in gynephilia, basically, often
Hmm.
results in lesbian identity, even sometimes, maybe especially butch lesbian identity, where they're able to dress more masculine, take on a more masculine role in some ways, maybe even just feel more masculine in contrast to their more feminine partner. But that it's likely that this is a common development of autoandrophilia.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So we seem to, yeah, we agree that the autoandrophilia is probably quite common in females, and we are hopefully in the comments going to find out if your autogynephilia is
Yeah.
a common female experience. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
And I
looking
just want
forward to
sorry,
go.
I know
Oh,
we're
go on.
wrapping up. I just want to bring home this point to why, once again, why we think that autoandrophilia is likely a prevalent ideology of lesbianism, of butch lesbianism, of the types of butch women who seek transition, is because the thing you kind of can't get away from is why would someone who is sort of repulsed by the opposite sex feel any type of thrill or desire to embody the opposite sex? And I think what we're trying to say is like having that somewhere in your psyche. There's, to me, it feels obviously there is something about the male body that you find attractive, even if you're not into men, even if you never want to be with a man. That feels hard to get away from in a completely non-judgmental way. I still think all of these women are lesbians. But in a non-judgmental way, it feels like we really need to grapple with the fact for both males and females, but you and I are females. How do we explain homosexuals who claim to have no heterosexual desires at all, wanting to embody the bodies that they are repulsed by? It just doesn't entirely make sense. And it feels like the reasonable thing to say is, well, maybe we're not entirely repulsed. Maybe I totally have a preference for the same sex, but there's something you at least admire in the opposite sex's body. And maybe admiration is a good way to put it too, because it takes this out of the realm of the fetish and into the realm of the I was just listening to a Phil conversation that was really good, but yeah, into the realm of like comfort and something being like precious and just part of who you are, as opposed to some, oh, this feels kind of dirty sexual drive.
Yep. It goes right back to what I was saying about it being more sentimental. It's like, this is what this is what I
Sentimental.
admire.
That's the word that I was looking for.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep. And less less directly about sex, and more about and embodying what you see value in. But yeah, I think we did a good job covering a high level here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the response is from people who may relate with your experience, and also further episodes where we dig more deeply into a lot of stuff we kind of just like brushed over in this one, and a lot more to come.
This was lovely.
Excellent.